Namaste. Greetings to all and welcome. Welcome to another episode of One Way of Thinking About It. One Way of Thinking About It is a Q&A platform where we take up questions from individuals around the world and we spend about 10 or so minutes deep diving into each question from our deepest understanding at this present moment. So, with the foundation laid, let's get into it. Our question today comes in from Las Vegas. Las Vegas checking in. Las Vegas in the building. Welcome. Thank you for being here. So our question today reads, how does one create self-value and self-love without others' feedback? Great question. Powerful question. So this is one way of thinking about it. So as you know how we do, we have to define a few words before we get into understanding the question fully. Because there's words that have a lot of different meanings for a lot of different people. So to get everybody on the same page, we're going to define the word self and love. So starting with self, we're going to define it in two parts. Higher self, lower self. So the higher self is what we call God, Brahman, source, existence, pure consciousness, pure awareness. This is the higher self. Now the lower self is the human being, the physical body, the mind, and the intellect. This is the lower self, not meaning that it's lower in any type of demeaning way. It's just the lower self. The higher self, God, source, has embodied into this human being to give it life and has been conditioned by the body, the mind, and intellect. So this is what makes it the lower self. That self is still there, but it has been conditioned. It does not know itself to be who it truly is, the higher self. So this is what classifies it as the lower self, not that it is this derogatory thing that we need to demonize, not at all. We just need to understand the difference between the two. So, and then our next word we want to define for the understanding of everyone is the word love, because everyone has a different meaning, understanding of love. So in this context, we are going to define love as identification plus unselfishness equals love. And the opposite of love is attachment. And that comes from identification plus selfishness equals attachment. So with these key pieces defined, let's get into the question. How does one create self-value and self-love? So self-value, let's start with self-value. And then again, there's two parts to this because we're dealing with the higher self and we're dealing with the lower self. So let's start with this lower self. Self-value for the lower self. It really doesn't need to be created or developed. It is already overdeveloped. There is way too much value that we put on this lower self. If you reflect upon this, if you think about this for a moment, our thoughts are consumed about this body, about our preferences, our likes and our dislikes, our feelings and emotions, and the intellect, our thoughts and ideas. This is what consumes a human being's thinking of the physical body, of the feelings and emotions, and of its thoughts and ideas. We put there's way too much value placed on this as is. So we do not need to develop this anymore. If there's anything, we need to create the value for the higher self, which now starts to pull us away from all this value that we give this lower self, which is ever changing, which is has a expiration period on it. And the higher self, this is what's really eternal, infinite, all-pervading. This is what really reality is about, is getting to know the value of the higher self. And we create this with higher knowledge, with scriptural knowledge, with knowledge from the great saints and sages and enlightened ones, the great masters who have reached this ultimate state of self-realization. And that's realizing the higher self. So how does one create self-love? Now with self-love for the lower self, again, well, what we have for the lower self already would be more of attachment, because it is a identification with selfishness, with this selfish possessiveness that we have for this lower self, for this body, for this mind, its feelings and emotions, for this intellect with its ideas and its thoughts. Only thing you have to do is reflect upon this and see the attachment that we have to this. Let anyone offend you or talk about you or say anything bad about you physically, mentally, intellectually, and see how you respond. You can tell right then and there if your identification is selfish or unselfish. If your identification with this physical body, the mind, and the intellect was unselfish, your response would be something like, is that so? Truly, with no discontent, no celebration of if a person was praising you or talking about you. There would be no celebration, there would be no letdown. It would just be, is that so? But 98% of humanity, that is not their response. Their response, God only knows what the response is going to be. We can only imagine. So if we really reflect and look upon our relationship, our identification with the lower self, we would see that it is pretty self-centered, selfish, very possessive with this human being. So how do we create the self-love with this human being is the formula. We already identify with it. So now we have to move from selfish, self-centered, possessive to unselfish. It is a possession of ours that we possess, but we do not have to be possessive of it. So again, turning from selfishness for this human being, the physical body, the mind, its feelings and emotions, and the intellect, your thoughts and ideas, is to turn from being selfish towards it to being unselfish. This one is a difficult one to get to, but it's possible. It's just starting to understand that how much identification that we have with this human being. This is what will start to turn it from selfish to unselfish, starting to become objective to this physical body, this feelings and emotions, these thoughts and ideas. This is really the way to really start to liberate ourselves, to free ourselves from the struggles, from the ups and downs that we can face when we are selfishly identified with this physical body, mind, and intellect. So now to look at it in the way of the higher self, how do we create self-love for the higher self? And again, it comes from higher knowledge, to truly start to know that there is a higher self, that there is something within all living beings that lights them up. To just start to know this, to start to understand, get the knowledge and understand that you're not at all truly the body, the mind, the intellect. These are equipments that we have been given to use and to navigate through this physical world that we live in, that we have the pleasure to enjoy. So through higher knowledge, true higher knowledge of the self, of the higher self, we can start to identify with it. And through that identification, unselfishly, this love is created. So how does one create self-value and self-love without others' feedback? As the words from the great Jesus Christ says, we all have to bear our cross sooner or later. Meaning that when we are on the road, the spiritual path to evolve, you are going to affect other people. One way or another, you're going to affect this. This is bearing your cross. The feedback is going to come back from others, but again, the same way that we start to look at the lower self objectively and say, is that so? We have to look at others and say, is that so? When we truly, because when we start to take in higher knowledge and we start to understand who we truly are, this higher self, when we start to understand this higher self, who we truly are, and that everyone, all living creatures and beings have this existence, source, energy, God energy flowing through them. And that's who they truly are. At the core of everyone, every living being is source, is the self, is God. You have to look and say, who am I when a person is going to give feedback, or you're going to give feedback to somebody? You have to ask yourself, who am I to tell God what to do or what not to do? That's blasphemy. The same way if someone is feeding back to you because you are choosing to live a certain way, you don't have to say it to them, you can say it to yourself. But when you truly start to know who you are, how could they possibly tell God what to do? Only you knows, only we know what we truly need to be doing and become to evolve. So this is one way of thinking about it. Thank you for joining me for this episode. Great question. If we have any questions, any extra questions, any comments, any clarifications, please leave them in the comment box below. Until next time, much love, health, peace, and prosperity, and blessings to all. Namaste.